Minnesota is in the spotlight, and it's not really for a good reason, but I think there is a silver lining here. And I'll tell you what I mean after I introduce my next guest, Dr. Scott Jensen. He is, of course, a physician. He's also a candidate for governor, I should say. Got a book out called We've Been Played, Exposing the Triad of Tyranny. Scott, how are you? Good to see you again, Doc.
Joe, it's good to be on, and I'm doing well, but obviously Minnesota's not. And the book I wrote 3 years ago, We've Been Played, talks about the triad of tyranny. What happens when government colludes? And I think we're seeing this with Tim Walz in Minnesota, and people are flabbergasted. They're saying, how in the devil could this happen? And I think when you get a person like Tim Walz in a position where he can absolutely run roughshod over all three legislative branches, all three, if you will, political branches, the executive office, the legislative branch, as well as even his powerful impact on the judicial branch. I mean, he has friends in the judicial sector of government that have donated to his campaigns. So Tim Walz has a lot of consolidated power, and he uses that. And that's why I've said so clearly, I think Tim Walz is involved in a major cover-up.
Well, I don't disagree with you, and a lot of what's coming out right now is absolutely flabbergasting is a good word. But Doc, I do think there's a silver lining. I'll explain that in a minute. Let's get down to the nitty gritty. Why are there so many Somalians in Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota, when the weather is nowhere near what it's like on the eastern coast of Africa? Why were they brought there? Was this Obama? Was there some other reason that Minnesota is attractive? I don't think they decided in Somalia, let's go to Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minnesota. Somebody brought them there, no?
You're absolutely right. And the progression actually started in the 1990s. And it's not as complicated as people might think. Frankly, people came. In Minnesota, we've got several faith-based organizations that have been quite aggressive about trying to make certain that refugees have a place to come. And so Somalians came to Minnesota. And I think there were a lot of programs available to help ease their assimilation. On top of that, what happens is after the first wave of immigrants come, frequently the next wave wants to go to an area where perhaps some people who know them best, speak their language, have already gone and so to speak, trailblazed some pathways. And so we started to see Minnesota become a real, if you will, melting pot for East African immigrants. And we saw it from Somalia, Somaliland, Ethiopia, and it just grew and grew, so that I do believe that Minnesota is probably the largest Somali community in the nation.
It is by a lot. I mean, I think it's like eightfold more than anybody else. So great answer, but you and I both know that in Somalia, it's being run by a bunch of terrorists. It's not a country like ours. It's not anything like Minnesota. Are the people, generally speaking, because you probably have them in your practice, are they trying to acclimate? Because it seems as though a lot of them, from Elon Omar on down, have no problem with fraud and scamming and lying and marrying your brother and stealing billions of dollars in aid. Are the general population of Somalians like they were in Somalia, or are they trying to become Minnesotans? Because the ones that we're hearing about aren't doing good things.
I think it's a mix, to be sure.
Okay.
But I think that the people that are probably least inclined to assimilate are the people that have found their way into some sort of a power circle. The everyday Somalian who's trying to eke out a living, raise their children, put a roof over their head and food in their tummies and take care of their kids. These people are desperately working to assimilate. I've been having lunch with one fellow for the last 7 years, and he started out with his own company doing a lawn service. And then from the lawn service, he added landscaping. Then he hired a few employees.
Great.
The Somalians definitely want to be independent business people, and they want to follow the pathway of other immigrant groups, other ethnic groups. I was blessed to have the opportunity to work with so many Southeastern Asian folks who came over in the late 70s and the 80s after the Vietnam War, people from Laos, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia. And these people benefited from our programs, our, if you will, our support programs, and they got off of them as soon as they could. I think at some level, Joel, the thing that we haven't talked about is in Minnesota, we have a multitude of entitlement programs, support programs,
right.
And we're not asking ourselves, are they working? Are they accomplishing their mission? If we have all these programs in place and we're spending more money than almost any other state, at some level we have to say, are we helping these folks in their transition or are we hurting it? There was a defense attorney who, in the New York Times article about 10 days ago, he said, listen, he said, some of these folks had the best of intentions. They were going to try to follow the law and do it normally, but it was just so darned easy. He said it was like the cookie jar was full and they could steal money from it and nobody asked questions. They just refilled the cookie jar. And I think that's where Tim Walz and, frankly, every Minnesotan has a right to say, what's going wrong in Minnesota? How do we spend so much money and not expect these programs to perform? A program starts out at $2.5 million, $2.5 million, and it goes to over $100 million in 3 years, and nobody's watching the store. Another program starts out at $5 million, and in 3 or 4 years, it's $400 million. Nobody would stop at the Holiday gas station to buy a Diet Coke that they expected to pay $3, and when the clerk says that'll be $400, they'd faint. They'd say, you can have your damn Diet Coke, and what the devil happened? That's what should have happened in Minnesota.
I'm with you. Let me tell people who you are again. It's Dr. Scott Jensen. He's a family physician, Minnesota governor candidate. I hope that you become the governor. He's got a book out called We've Been Played, Exposing the Triad of Tyranny. I want to get into that full-throated in a moment. Fraudsters stole over $1 billion from Medicaid. We're hearing about $2, $5, $8 billion missing from adult daycare, allegedly, from feeding everybody that never got fed. Doc, how does this get so out of control, and is there any way that Tim Walz could not have known this was happening?
I don't think there's any way that Tim Walz could not have known. I do think a critical question is, what did he know and when did he know it and when did he actively start to cover it up? When did he start to tell hundreds of his employees to shut up? He's not interested in having their whistleblowing activities take place. He squashed them. How much data has been deleted? Why has Tim Walz been unwilling to release data when asked for it? It's pretty clear from a timeline that in the early part of 2020, the Minnesota Department of Education realized there was a tremendous, exorbitant increase in agencies that wanted to be involved in collecting money to feed our kids.
Right.
That was when they first knew about it. Now, did they do anything worthwhile or what a typical business person would do in the first few months? No, they didn't. They just dragged their feet. But it wasn't until 2021 that the FBI was brought in the spring. And then in 2022 in September, when the FBI started to issue and get some of its indictments, that was when you saw Tim Walz all of a sudden try to grab the stage and say, well, yep, here we are. We investigated. We did a lot of the heavy lifting and we've turned it over to the FBI and to the U.S. attorney. That was absolutely a crock of crap.
Wow.
They didn't do any of that. Tim Walz tried to run a victory lap. And in 2022, you had Judge Guthman say, when Tim Walz said, well, we would have stopped the payments sooner, but the judge told us we had to keep on making the payments. The judge came out in an unprecedented action and said, Tim Walz is not telling the truth. So then Tim Walz says, well, gee whiz, the judge is not going to stay quiet. I'm going to have to find someone else. So then he blames the FBI. And the FBI said, we never told you that you had to keep making fraudulent payments. Tim Walz has been willing to blame anybody, and this is his modus operandi. But the bottom line is they did nothing. And I think people have to ask the next question, why? Why would the governor of Minnesota be so hell-bent on letting fraud just bubble up and continue? And I think the answer lies in what would it have taken if Tim Walz had done the normal thing, had demanded accountability. It would have put his voting blocks at risk. He did not want to jeopardize the fact that he's got these minority voting blocks that the Democrats have been able to count on for years. And that was more important to Tim Walz than truth and justice. And on top of that, I think Tim Walz is a very ambitious governor. He wants to go up the ladder as much as he can. So voting blocks matter, virtue signaling matter, and quite frankly, if Tim Walz thought he could get away with it, easy peasy.
No, well, Doug, let me ask you this, because this is all very well said. Now, I'm following you, and I trust that what you're saying is the case. First of all, Tim Walz is not going to go anywhere. He was such a fool as the vice presidential nominee. I think he's done. The fact that he's running for re-election in Minnesota really does give me pause because I fear he might win. But you're talking about voting blocks, and I take you at your word when you say most Somalians want to be part of the American culture. They want to be a melting pot. They want to acclimate. So this is just a small percentage of people that are doing all this fraud. There is no voting bloc out there that wants to vote yes on fraud. So how is it that he would alienate them? Wouldn't he look like the hero or the star if he said, I'm going to stop the fraud. I can't believe this happened. This is Minnesotans' money. This is American taxpayers' money. I'm going to be your hero. Why wouldn't he do that? Why would he be complicit or complacent?
It's a great question. And I think the point that needs to be made is between, even now, after 10, 15, 20, 25 years, 50 to 75% of the Somali community in Minnesota is on one program or another in regards to free stuff, whether it's healthcare, whether it's SNAP. So even though we've had this population with us for 20 to 30 years, you still have over half getting free stuff. When I was running in 2022, there were rumors, and I was never able to verify them, but there were rumors that Democrats would go out and frighten the Somali people saying, if you don't vote for Tim Walz, you might not be able to get this apartment at a discounted rate. You might not be able to get healthcare. You might not be able to get food stamps or SNAP program. So I think that even though there's a tremendous number, 10, 20,000 Somalis that want to be able to dream dreams and go out and build businesses, there is absolutely somewhere between 30 and 60,000 Somalis on programs that they do not want to see go away. And Tim Walz hasn't connected the program with the mission of the program, because that's pivotal. If you're going to be spending taxpayer dollars, you've got to make sure that when you pass a program, you know what you want it to do. And then you've got to measure it to make sure that it's doing what you said it would do. That's not happening.
Dr. Scott Jensen, he is, of course, family physician. He's also running for governor of the great state of Minnesota. His book is called We've Been Played, Exposing the Triad of Tyranny. Okay, so what you just said, it's not the first time I've heard that people in the Somalian community in Minneapolis, St. Paul, have been strong-armed into voting one certain way, or else you'll lose this, and this. That's electioneering. It's illegal. That's pay to play. None of that's okay. Now, again, you're not the first person who's told me this has happened. The FBI is aware, I'm guessing, of these allegations. The FEC, I would think, would be aware, the Federal Elections Commission. Why isn't anybody doing anything about it? Again, this isn't just a rumor anymore. We've got anecdotal people like you, but others who are actually from that community going, this really happened. James O'Keefe went in there and did an investigation about collecting ballots and paying for ballots in that community in Minnesota. Doc, why can't anybody stop this? It's illegal.
As soon as anybody brings it up, they're said to saying they're spreading misinformation, they're conspiracists.
They're racists.
They're racist, they're insensitive. I mean, literally in Minnesota, word policing is become an art form.
Wow.
And there's words virtually every week that are all of a sudden taken off the list of what can be said. I mean, I've almost wanted to have people send me a list every month of, okay, what are the words I'm not supposed to use this month? This is where Minnesota's at. And the only thing that's really blown the lid off of this, Joe, is the national media. It hasn't been local media. It's been the fact that national media has been covering it. The White House has gotten involved. We've got Scott Bessent talking about it. We've got other people talking about it. We've got the IRS trying to follow some of these trails of where did the dollars go. There's a lot of Minnesotans who would not believe that more than $50,000 were donated from these fraudsters to elected officials in Minnesota.
Wow.
Now that that's come out, we've got all these elected officials like Keith Ellison clamoring, saying, oh yeah, we paid it back. We weren't willing to take those dollars. Well, the fact of the matter was, Keith Ellison had a group of Somali people in his office. He let them know that he was going to cover their back. It was after that he got thousands of dollars of donations. So it has to beg the question, are there dollars out there sequestered in bank accounts, whether offshore or not, that people can still tap into that are composed of Minnesota taxpayer dollars?
Right.
Because if that's the case, then we have the potential that this isn't just a cover-up, then we have the potential that there's an ongoing active pay-to-play scheme going on. And I think we have an obligation to ask, are there elected officials involved in this? And people sometimes say, Doc, you're going down a rabbit hole here. That's exactly what happened in 1972. When Watergate building was broken into, people said, well, this will never amount to anything, whatever. 2 years later, we had the president of the most powerful country in the world resigning in order to avoid being impeached.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Dr. Scott Jensen. Go follow him, drscottjensen.com. It's drscottjensen.com. Get the book called We've Been Played, Exposing the Triad of Tyranny. Had Liz Collin on last week, and she gave me some great insight into all of this fraud that's happening in Minnesota. And somebody actually called the show yesterday, Doc, and said the local media actually covered this thing. Are you starting to see the local legacy media going, we can't really ignore this stuff anymore? Right now, Minnesota's on the national stage. If we don't say something, we're going to be looked at as who we've been for the past 5-6 years. Is the local media starting to catch on to this, or are they still giving cover to what Walz is doing, what Ellison's doing?
There's no question the local media is stepping up. There's one media source called the Minnesota Reformer, who was that if you will, organization has been identified as being pretty hard left at times.
Right.
But they've come out and they've asked, okay, Tim Walz, are you going to take responsibility? There have been some very thoughtful articles that have come out of that agency asking hard questions. And I think what's happened is that has caused other news organizations to say, we better step up to the table. So it may feel like it was on a slow track, but it is encouraging, I think, to a lot of Minnesotans that we're starting to see the Minnesota media step up, say, hold it. This is not okay. Tim Walz, acknowledge where you went wrong. Tell us what you're going to do to fix it, and don't just try to bloviate and throw, BS at us. We want to know, what are you really going to do to solve it? Because right now, I think, quite frankly, we've got politicians on both sides of the aisle using this issue to try to run victory laps for things that they didn't earn. This fraud has been going on for more than just during COVID. This was prior to COVID. We saw this when I was in the Senate. We saw it with the daycare program. We saw it with Tim Walz moving people laterally to get them out of the limelight. If they weren't doing their job, there was one situation where an inspector general was literally ignoring the input coming to her, and basically she was put on administrative leave, sat home for months and months and months, was paid tens of thousands of dollars, and then quietly moved over into another department where she made $130,000, but she was out of the limelight. There's piece of evidence after evidence after evidence that shows there has been an effort, a very skilled effort, to cover this up, to quiet it down, to shut down any potential whistleblowers. And it's been going on literally since Tim Walz became elected governor.
It's Dr. Scott Jensen, of course, family physician. Go get his book. It's called We've Been Played, Exposing the Triad of Tyranny. Let me finish up on the Somalian situation, and thanks for what you just said about the media. I think you're right on all counts. I know there are a lot of good Somalians here. My grandfather was an immigrant, not from Somalia, from Italy, but when he came over, he wanted to be an American. All of his 8 children only spoke English, didn't teach them how to speak Italian. Are you finding as new generations come up in the Somali community, they want to be more American? And do you agree with me when I say, if more good people from Somalia stepped up to a microphone and a camera and said, we aren't represented by what Omar's doing, by what these 78 indicted people did or allegedly did in the scam, we're good people. We want to be Americans. We want to be your neighbors. I almost feel like we need to have more of them step up and say that. Do you agree?
I do. And that was why I went down last Monday, about 9 days ago. They called me and said, national news people are coming out here. And this was before President Trump had made some of his volatile comments.
Yes.
And so they said, would you come down? So I went down, and it was fascinating. The first person I saw that morning running a Somali business was a woman who runs a coffee shop. And she said to me, I don't like what Ilhan Omar says or what she stands for. Next person I saw said, why don't the Republicans have a candidate to run against Democrat Senator Omar Fateh, who had just lost the election for mayor in Minneapolis? We wanted to know, where's the Republican Party to run a candidate against them? The next person I saw said, I don't want to be labeled because of bad Somalis. And I know there are bad Somalis out there. So
Yeah.
they do want their voice to be heard and magnified. And I think even programs like this, Joe, where we talk about this, it matters.
Yes.
Because we have seen immigrant group after immigrant group come to America and make their way. And I think one of the most successful immigrant stories in Minnesota in my lifetime was to literally watch the people from Vietnam, Laos, watch the Hmong people, watch the Cambodians, the Thais, come to America, come to Minnesota, and become an engine for our economy.
Yes.
Did they need the programs that we had set up for a couple of years? Absolutely. But today, under Tim Walz, our programs are without rudder. They're without accountability. They blow up from 2 million to 100 million. Nobody says a word. They go from 5 million to 400 million. Nobody says a word. $250 million are gone and nobody says a word. And
Crazy.
then when employees of the Minnesota Department of Human Services try to say something, they're squashed. Tim Walz has absolutely allowed this to happen on his watch. And this hurts Somali people. This is not helping them. And they know it. We need to make people that come to our country recognize that we're not interested in having them come in as a Trojan horse and undermine the American spirit.
Right.
We're interested in having them come to our country, help build America. And I think we need and are entitled to expect people that come to our country to make some sacrifices, to assimilate, to learn our language, and to help build America, build Minnesota, and love our country.
I could not agree more. It's Dr. Scott Jensen. Let me ask you about this guy, Jacob Fry. I mean, what a fool. This is a guy who, I'm calling him a fool, not you. He obviously went to the Obama speech pattern school. He talks about Somalians, their fathers and entrepreneurs, and they make the Minneapolis engine run. We are Somalians. They are Minneapolis. This guy taking the side of one culture or one community over everybody else in Minneapolis, St. Paul doesn't make sense. Then he sits down at some Somali restaurant, and funnily, I mean, it was humorous. His face when he was eating the food was like it was in pain. But here he is. The guy is completely selling out to just one segment of that community, and just like leaving everybody else in the cold. And he's talking about possibly calling 911 on ICE agents when they come and not working at all to help law enforcement from the federal government enforce the law. What do you make of this guy? Why is he the mayor? I guess the other choice was really horrible, but why isn't there a Republican or a conservative or a moderate that's running to be the mayor of that great city?
Well, Minneapolis has been a blue city for a long time, and I think a lot of people are getting fed up. But I think Jacob Fry represents what's happening to politics, not just in Minnesota, but I think across our land. People get elected and they start to have this notion that this seat, this salary, this position of power is mine, and I'm going to hold on to it regardless of what I have to do. Right. So we are seeing a gross level of pandering, of licking your finger and holding it up to see which way the wind's blowing today. Right. We're seeing virtue signaling like never before. Jacob Fry has at times stepped into the fray and made some solid decisions. But too often, he is literally pandering to what's the flavor of the day. And when he does that, he's not helping Somalia. He's not helping the Somali folks, and he's not helping Minneapolis. He has made very few bold steps that are going to help restore Minneapolis to be the city it was 10, 20 years ago. Make no mistake about it, Joe. Minneapolis is in trouble. The streets are empty. At night, some of the busiest nightclub kind of places that previously enjoyed tremendous energy and population of people, it's like a desert. It's like a ghost town.
Wow.
Minneapolis restaurants shutting down. We've had hundreds of restaurants shut down in Minneapolis over the last several years. So clearly, Jacob Fry is going to have to roll up his sleeves, ask himself what he's made of, and start making the hard decisions that will help Minneapolis get on a pathway that brings it back. Because right now it's not happening, and he's not helping the Somalis.
Well, I mean, if I'm somebody who lost my business in the summer of love, the George Floyd riots, I wouldn't come back to Minneapolis. It's not attractive. I don't know what would attract me to do that. In fact, I had somebody call the other day who said they were visiting Minneapolis and they were told by somebody in the Somali community, don't wear an American flag shirt to the Mall of America. Why? Because people don't like it there. What is that? That's a very strange thing. I would not think of that great American city in those terms, but I guess you have to. So should you become the governor, do you work with the mayor of Minneapolis and other mayors around the state and say, here's how we can fix it, here's how we can work as a coalition to bring this city back to greatness? Or do you think he would be even open to that?
I think he would be open to it because, frankly, as governor, I would demand it. And I would demand a level of transparency that just hasn't happened yet. I would tell people, listen, we're going to have these conversations in front of the media. We are going to collectively, as a state, start solving some of these problems. I think this is why Tim Walz and perhaps others misgauged how critical people have been of the new Minnesota flag. It was that it smacked of political correctness. It smacked of a few small people saying, in regards to the Minnesota heritage as reflected on the state seal and the state flag, they just wiped it out. A few people says, no, we're going to change it. People celebrated our flag because it speaks of our past and our present and our future.
Yes.
It talks challenges that we've had in the past, and it speaks to our future. People are furious about what happened to the former Minnesota flag. And it's not because they're racist or anything else. They respect our heritage, the fact that as a state, we've had challenges and we've plowed through them. And all of a sudden, all that heritage, all that history, all that richness was thrown out the door because someone said this is politically insensitive. Well, you know what?
Crazy.
Part of our past is politically flawed. And it is part of our past. It doesn't go away just because we want to throw a piece of fabric to the sidelines and have something bland and vanilla take its place.
That doesn't make any sense. It's Dr. Scott Jensen. Go to drscottjensen.com. Go check out his candidacy for Minnesota governor. In the time we have remaining 4 or 5 minutes, Doc, let's talk about who the triad is. We've been played. Exposing the Triad of Tyranny is the book. Show the book again if you don't mind. Let people see the book. You got to go and grab this right now. It's been out for a few years. It's by Dr. Scott Jensen. Who is the Triad of Tyranny? Can you explain who that is to my audience?
It bubbled up much like a volcano in the early 2020, and we saw it for the next 3 or 4 years, where we saw big government collude with big pharmacy, and they worked with big tech to get their message across. We saw a synchronization of messaging like never before, an absolute brainwashing of the American people. You know, this time we said, if there was one false overarching message that should never have been put out there, it was do it for grandma. Don't kill grandma. We saw this take place because big tech, big pharma, and big government said it would. We saw big pharma make inroads into profitability they never would have been able to make without big government coming alongside of them. Those three players crushed individual liberties the American people have been guaranteed in the Constitution. We've been played. People were told things that now are coming out that were absolutely not true. We had businesses locked down. We had kids locked out of schools. We had elderly, frail people locked into nursing home facilities, knowing virtually that they would die lonely deaths. We've been played, and the only way that we can prevent it from happening again, Joe, is by never forgetting. And that's why I wrote the book, is we've been played, and there was a triad of tyranny that did it. It's been fascinating to me to watch President Trump dismantle some of this with the FDA, with Bobby Kennedy, Marty McCary, Jay Bhattacharya at the NIH. It's been fascinating to watch the big tech companies step in line and acknowledge that what they did was wrong, what they did was unethical attempts. When they shut people down like Alex Berenson, they're coming out saying, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. So I think we're seeing a dismantling of this triad, and we need to remember how it came to be.
I couldn't agree more, and I love all the people that you mentioned. Dr. Oz is involved in that as well. As we're watching it unfold, though, you see the massive pushback by big pharma, by big control, apparatus. They don't like it. I mean, they've been attacking Bobby Kennedy from day one. You shouldn't be in that job. They're trying to get rid of him, just like they're trying to get rid of Pete Hegseth. But when it comes to the Health and Human Services side of it, when it comes to the FDA, when it comes to the NIH, when it comes to the CDC, when it comes to HHS, what happens when President Trump, ends his term and, God forbid, somebody who's more left gets in there? Do they reestablish that control again? Doc, is there a way to make these changes permanent and keep on fighting back the trillions of dollars that's being invested by Big Pharma to keep control? Can this be long-lasting?
I think it can. And I think the lesson we learned was actually from the colonists more than 200 years ago. If you look at the uprising that became the American nation, historians have indicated that the number of colonists that wanted to rebel against England was probably less than 20%. But through the fights, the battles, and the transparency, literally, America became a nation where at one point in time, 100% of its citizens would hold strong to the flag and to what we represent. I think the lesson is transparency. The fact that we have people like Dr. Oz and, like I said, Marty McCary, Bobby Kennedy, Jay Bhattacharya, and many others, even Robert Redfield, the former CDC director, coming out and saying, listen, we should be withdrawing all the mRNA vaccines.
Right.
This transparency, you will not be able to put the genie back in the bottle. When we hear a vaccinologist like Dr. Paul Offit come out, acknowledge and confess that he didn't get the boosters for the COVID vaccine. And this is the guy who was saying it. When we see this happen, they might try to stuff the genie back in the bottle again in 3, 4, 8 years. I don't think it's going to happen. But I think J.D. Vance is going to be the next president after Trump anyway. And I think that's going to give us a chance to continue the open dialogue and continue to enhance transparency. Because it's in transparency and in every citizen taking seriously their obligation to be an engaged American citizen. No sitting in the cheap seats. Every one of us has to walk into the arena and say, I'm going to do my part. John Kennedy said it many years ago, ask not what your country can do for you, but what can you do for your country?
Yeah.
The time is now. The time is now.
I agree with you. Last question, Doc, and I appreciate how you spelled that out. Last question has to be this. People are frustrated because Fauci's still getting $400,000 a year in his pension and just walks free when this guy lied to us directly into the camera and lied about everything when it came to how we were supposed to act in the pandemic. Will anybody pay the price? Because I think Americans want somebody to pay the price for wronging us for that entire period.
I wish I knew the answer, Joe.
Yeah.
I think that Tony Fauci and what he got away with, and some of his colleagues that made millions and millions of dollars, the amount of profit that Pfizer made on the vaccines was enormous. And I remember the Pfizer CEO telling people that they needed to get vaccinated, not for themselves, but to do it for the next person, to do it for grandma. And now we find out that they didn't even have any evidence. No evidence that it would prevent transmission. There was never any real evidence that would say that you should divert from what we've always said regarding vaccines. We tell people to take vaccines to protect themselves. We don't try to guilt them into taking vaccines and say, if you don't, you're killing someone else.
Yeah.
What was put upon the American people will go down in history as one of the darkest, biased messages and propaganda that America ever experienced. This is literally worse than what happened in the Cold War.
And that's provably true. What we're finding out now is just earth-shattering and mind-numbing. It is Dr. Scott Jensen. Go to drscottjensen.com, support him there, and make sure if you're in Minnesota, you got to consider this guy. I want him to be your next governor. He's running for governor of Minnesota. Get the book also called We've Been Played, Exposing the Triad of Tyranny. Doc, thanks for jumping in the chair on short notice. I really appreciate all the time you gave us, and let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you so much. All right, that's it for Unshaken and Unafraid with Joe Pags this time. Another one to drop very soon.